All right, so picking up from where we left off the last time, we ended with the summary question. Now, something I just want to add for the summary before we move on is right, we talked about you have 10 marks available for content. Assalamu alaikum, Haris. Hope you're doing well. We just started. Okay, so you've got 10 marks
Walaikum
available. You've got 10 marks available for content. And in a summary, you can see your word limit is very low, right? And I mentioned that in our previous class that it is a strict word limit, right? And you need to add 10 content points in those many words. So the things you don't want to do, right, is give an introduction. So these are some don'ts. Again, we're not doing the summary right now, but what you don't want to do is give an introduction, right? So this began when on that day in that year when so and so event took place. You don't want to do that, right? So you don't want to do an introduction, right? You want to, right, start from the first point off the bat. Start with the first point directly. Secondly, you don't want to add unnecessary details, right? You just want the main point. There's a question or a comment? Yes, Haris, please ask.
Sir, I have a question. In my summaries, I always give a brief sentence on the entire topic of the text that I get. So that is unnecessary, right?
It is, yes. You don't need to do that. And because it's not a valid content point, you won't be, getting a mark for it. And worst case scenario, because your introductory sentence would be maybe 10 words, 12 words, uh, so right, or even 8 words, even if it's so that is 8 words less that you have. So if you've written your entire summary and you have some words to spare, then maybe you can add that, although again, right, it won't add to what's actually the requirement of the question. So right, so again, you won't be getting a mark for that introductory line. Just keep that in mind. It is not a requirement. Right. So what you don't want to do is add details. What you do want is the main point. Now, how to, separate or differentiate between these two, that is, right, a skill that we need to develop, right? How to do that. Okay. Another don't, although it's clearly mentioned over here in the question, right? But do not use bullet points. Do not put any sort of bullet points, right? Whether they're in the form of, a dot or a star or an arrow or a number, right? This is point number 1 out of 10, and then this is like point number 5 out of 10. You don't do that, right? Write it as a paragraph. So you want to write it as a paragraph. All right. So those are just some things that you want to keep in mind when attempting a summary. And again, choice of words. So there might be situations where instead of writing out a very long sentence, you can just use like 1 or 2 or 3 words that will give the entire meaning because you're using specific words. Now, obviously, that would mean that you have that kind of vocabulary at your disposal to work with, right? And that would be a good thing. An example of that is, although not for a summary, it was for a narrative, and this I guided my students towards in class. It's an example I give whenever I'm teaching, shortening sentences or using vocabulary. So the story was about a king, and the king possibly dying, and his son being made the new king and whatever. And so what the students were doing is they were writing a long sentence, something like the ceremony to crown, apologies for the handwriting, the new king was, and whatever. And I told them, well, this whole thing, there's a word for it, and that's called coronation. Right? Yes, it is coronation, right? The spelling you can see on screen, right? And so you've got this word. Instead of writing all of this, now in a narrative, right, it depends whether you want to give that detail for effect or whether you want to be precise. But the reason I'm giving this example over here is in a summary, you want to be precise, right? And so, right, you would want to use the word coronation. That will be saving you like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, right? And so you're using one word instead of 8, and that's saving you 7 words, which is a lot. Now, also it says that it should be no more, right? So you can't go over, right? How much under can you be? Well, you can be, let's say you should be at least 135 to 140 words, at least, right? If it's lower than this, well, what happens is that if it's lower than 135, then you've most likely missed points, right? You don't have your 10 points. If it's more than 150, well, you're writing too much. And also then you're giving details which would cause you to lose points because you're missing main points and you're focusing more on details, right? And so what would happen is as soon as you go over, right? I mentioned this the last time, I believe. As soon as you go over 150, right? It's not checked. You won't lose marks. There's no negative marking, but the examiner just won't check it. And so because you wrote too much, you put in a lot of details, and right, so perhaps 1 or 2 of your points is after the 150 limit, and so the examiner won't check it, and so that's a loss, obviously, right? So not too less, because again you're not writing enough of the main points, and so you're going to lose over there, not going over because you're writing too much, and then your main points are not within the limit. All right, any questions regarding this? Okay, good. Now, moving on. Okay. So, moving on, what I want to do is, before moving to the writing paper, I want to share the mark scheme. Can you see this PDF, the general marking principles? Can you see that? Okay. So the marking scheme is available online, right? It's not a hidden document. And right, every marking scheme that you open for any subject, I believe, will have some generic marking principles. Generic means general, right? So what that means is these are the principles that the examiner will follow for throughout your paper, regardless of what kind of question it is. And then they've got specific marking principles for each type of question. Now, you're not the examiner, obviously, right? So how does this concern you? Well, the reason I'm sharing this is so that you know how the examiner is going to grade you, and so it will give you it will help you knowing how to approach the question, how to answer the question. Okay, so if we just go through this very briefly and quickly, right, the first principle is that marks must be awarded for the specific content and general level description of the question. So those are given with the question, right? So it's different for the comprehension, it's different for the summary, it's different for directed writing and the composition. So wherever those level descriptors are given, right, the examiner will use those to mark. So we'll look at those as well. The specific skills defined in the mark scheme. So again, that will come later. We'll take a look at that. And so for each question, the required skill is different. And if you're meeting that skill, then you will be graded. The standard of response required by the candidate as exemplified by the standardization scripts. Okay, so what kind of response are you expected to give? Right? For example, you're expected to produce a piece of formal writing, you're expected to be, in a summary, you're expected to be concise and be able to pick out the main points, right? Use your own language, etc., etc. Okay, so the kind of response that you're expected to give. The second principle is you're always awarded whole marks, right? So there is no 0.5, there is no 0.25 in Cambridge. Either you get the mark or you don't. Okay. Then what you have is, right, you always awarded positively. So there's no negative marking in Cambridge, right? You don't lose a mark for getting something wrong in the sense that, well, okay, my score is 10. I got an answer wrong and that was worth 1 mark. So I get -1. That doesn't happen. If you got an answer wrong, you will get a 0, not a negative mark. Okay. So you're given marks for valid answers, right? Credit is also given to answers which go beyond the scope of the syllabus, but that is, that's for the examiner to decide. So you can't go in and say, well, what I wrote was good and the examiner should have marked me for it. They do consider it. If it's not what they expected, the answer is not what they expected to get, but it is something that seems valid, and so the examiners will discuss it amongst themselves and they'll see whether to award a point or not. But that is not something we want to risk. So we want to be on point with our answers. Acha. If when the candidate demonstrates that they know right what they know and can do, right? So they're doing what they're supposed to, you get a mark. Again, no marks are deducted for errors, no marks are deducted for omissions, right? So if you've cut something out, you're not going to lose marks. You're not going to be graded for it either, but there's no loss. Okay. Right, answers should only be judged on the quality of spelling, punctuation, grammar when these features are assessed, right? So for example, in your comprehension, spelling, punctuation, and grammar isn't the focus, right? Unless your spelling is something that gives a completely different meaning or makes the word, it's not understandable, right? But if the spelling is slightly wrong and it sounds the same as the word it should be, right, then you won't be penalized. But that's not the case for everything, right? So spellings do matter, obviously, everywhere in your writing paper, in the summary, right? Your vocabulary and punctuation matter. Comprehension, not so much. So where it's not assessed everywhere, but wherever it is, obviously, right, you'll be graded accordingly. Okay, so this does not concern you, right? So these rules should be applied consistently. So that's for the examiner. Right, and okay, so this doesn't concern you either. And right, marks are awarded, right, solely on the requirements is defined, right? So the examiner, what the examiner does is like, okay, fine, this is the requirement of the question. If the candidate is meeting the requirement of the question, they'll be marked. Okay, so there. Now, as you can see over here, this question 1 of paper 1 is the comprehension, and you can see that what you'll be expected to demonstrate, as I mentioned in our previous classes, is your understanding of explicit meaning, implicit meaning, and implicit meaning. And they're actually given a breakup of which of these assessment objectives is being tested in which question. Okay, so that is the approach. And so when you know this, right, and the individual questions might differ, but question 1, according to the 2024 to 2028 syllabus, right, this is it. So, and this is also given in the syllabus document that I shared with you, right? So again, have that with you, take a read. So R1 and R2 are tested for question 1. And if we move on, so these are the answers. I'm not looking at those at the moment. Right? And for question 2, which is the writer's meaning and effect, it's R4 that is being tested. And you can see that's R4 throughout. Right? And that is to demonstrate an understanding of how writers achieve effect and influence readers. Okay. So we've spoken about that as well. Moving on. Okay. Then comes the summary, right? And part A of the summary question, which is the actual summary, which is worth 20 marks. And you can see over here that there are 2 reading objectives and 2 writing objectives, because obviously you have to write the summary after reading the text. So both of these are being tested skills, but which objectives exactly? So understanding explicit meanings, because the summary, all the text is there and you're supposed to pick out the correct points and write them down. Right? And because you're supposed to pick out the correct points and write them down, right? Your ability to select and use information for specific purposes, that is what is being tested. If you're able to pick out the correct points, right, that's when you get marks. Also, right, because you're supposed to structure it properly and you're supposed to use it, your own words while writing the summary, right, as far as possible. And so your writing objectives of organizing and structuring ideas for deliberate effect, so being able to write a proper summary, right, properly organized, and then using a range of vocabulary and sentence structures appropriate to context. So that's the writing in your own words concept. So those are the skills and those are the objectives that will be tested in question 3A. And here's a further breakup. So it says 10 marks for content and 10 marks for using your own language. And so it says over here, marks for reading, which is basically the 10 marks for content. They've given these levels, level descriptors that were mentioned earlier. And from the lowest to the highest, so you can see what's being tested. The highest, right, you can get either a 9 or a 10. And a wide range of relevant ideas were picked out and they were skillfully selected. Okay, so it's not that you picked out all the ideas from the beginning or just the end, right? You've got a variety of them from the beginning, from the middle, from the end. There is a bit of leeway, right? As I mentioned, if I just show you the number of points available, there are 13 for the one in the specimen paper. I mentioned this in our last class, that if they're asking you for 10 points, then there are 12 to 13 points available, right? So you do have that breathing space, and then you can also range, help yourself by writing in more than 10 points as a safety net. So I mentioned that the last class. And so, right, your ideas are selected skillfully means you are to the point, not the details, the actual point that needs to be mentioned, and a wide range, right? The lesser the marks means it's not done as well. So you can read all of that. And again, the mark scheme is also available online, so you can get your hands on those. Then for the quality of your writing, so 10 marks for that. And again, right, so the levels for each, and they've described it. And the highest one, they say a relevant response that is expressed clearly, fluently, and mostly with concision. So it is well organized, right? Expressed clearly. So what you're saying is not ambiguous. The examiner doesn't think like, okay, what is this candidate trying to say? They won't try to understand what you're saying. They'll only judge you on what you've written. Okay, it's fluent, right? So there's a flow, there's good vocabulary, and mostly with concision, right? So again, to the point, right? No unnecessary details. It's well organized. Okay, it's not just you're not just throwing the points together. And also when they say well organized, right? So what you're doing is, right, you're careful about the sequence of points. So you're organizing that as well, right? It's not that the point that should come at the end comes first and then start, and you're ending with something that should be mentioned in the middle. No, right? So this proper sequence, points that should come at the start and then the mid and then the end. So, right? And if there's a point that is repeated in the text, you do not repeat it in the summary normally, right? So no repeats, because if it's repeated in the text, and if you use the same point twice in the summary normally, and I say normally because there have been instances where Cambridge has given marks for it, to be very honest, right? But as a teacher, what I'm supposed to guide you for is that don't use the same point again in the summary if it has been mentioned more than once in the text normally, right? Because you will not be awarded marks for repeating it, right? Unless the case becomes that, right? For example, you are somewhere at 8 or 9 points and you're looking for one more point, you can't find it, and you see that something's been repeated maybe 2 or 3 times in the text, and you're say like, but it's been repeated 2 or 3 times, so maybe Cambridge will allow it, and then you write that as your 10th point. So maybe it will work, right? So if that's the case, if you're able to find 10 unique points without the repetition, then yeah, do that. Okay. Then the response is in the candidate's own words and or sentence structure, right? And a range of vocabulary which clarifies meaning. So, right, that should be clear. So, right, at this point of our course. Then question 3B, right? The only thing it's testing is the understanding of implicit meaning and attitude, worth 5 marks, and they've given the answer over here. There's no, right? I mean, the only marking rubric over here is, right, consistent and relevant perspective offered. So it's not like if they're asking for your opinion, you start with, for example, I agree. And then, right, the example you're giving is something that contradicts your initial opinion, and you're giving an example or a point that would cause you, that would give the suggest that you are disagreeing with it. So consistent and relevant perspective offered. So if I agree with the opinion, for example, or I disagree with the opinion, then, right, when I state that in the beginning, then whatever explanation and whatever example from the text I give to support my answer should also be in line with my opinion. Ideas are developed and supported, right? So again, the point is that if I say that I agree with this opinion, then, right, I offer the supporting text, the support, the support from the text, and also then I explain it accordingly, right? So my explanation should also be in support. So all of that should be consistent. Any questions about this?
No, sir.
Should the summary be written as a first person or a third person? So normally a summary should be written in third person, and it should be passive, sometimes passive in passive voice, and indirect speech. Okay. And another question comes in, which tense should the summary be in? So normally it's in, by the standards of summary writing, it should be in present tense. But what you can do is when you read the text and you see which tense is the text written in. Is it written in present tense or is it written in past tense? And so you can just go along with it. So if the text is written in present tense, you write the summary in present tense. If the text is written in past tense, you write your summary in past tense. All right. So that's for, right, the mark scheme overall, right, overview. Next, we come to the writing paper. Okay. Now, I don't think I'll be able to cover all of this in the time we have left, but right, let's start. And so the writing paper, as you can see, right, it's 2 hours long. It's worth a total of 50 marks. So there's 25 marks for the directed writing, and 25 marks for the composition, right? And this one does not have an insert, okay? So, and one thing to keep in mind when you're, attempting the paper on both your question paper and answer sheet, if there's an answer booklet given separately, or if it's, part of the paper, always read the instruction, right? Read everything. Like, you're sitting for the English paper, right? But just read this. Is it Cambridge O level? Did they, hopefully there was no mistake and they didn't give you an IGCSE paper. Read the subject, right? Read the code, right? Which paper it is. It's paper two writing. They'll have the session over here. So for you, it would be June 2025, right? The time, any instruction, right? You know the instructions, you practice this, but read it during the exam, right? Know what you're being told, right? Read the information. So always do that. Don't skip it. Okay. Also, for your answer booklet, right? So if I just go back up, so write your candidate name properly, clearly, right? Your center number, if you're not sure about it, ask the invigilator who's going to be there. Your candidate number, again, right? Read all the instructions and do as you're told, because if you don't follow this, you're just putting yourself at risk. Okay. And again, that's not something we want to do. So coming to the writing paper, the first question, section A, would be directed writing. Now, the reason this is called directed writing, okay, is because when you see the question, right, you can see that okay, so what you can see is that you're given the topic, sure, and then you're told what to write about. You're told what to write about, you're told how to write it, what to focus on, right? How to approach it. So you're going to use information from both the texts, right? You're told to use a suitable headline in this case because it's a magazine article. And so because you are given instructions, right, or which you can call directions about what to write and how to write, and therefore it is called directed writing. Right, so just a little something you want to know. The word limit is 250 to 350. You do not want to be under the limit. Okay. So your writing should not be less than 250. And you want to be somewhere around 300, right? So that's a sweet spot. You could possibly go over 350. You will not be penalized for it. The word limit over here is not strict. So you could go over 350 words, but you don't want to do that because then you'll be writing too much. I'm sorry, just a minute. I'm really sorry. Okay. So if you're going over through 350 words, right, you'll be writing too much. And there are two issues with that. One is you'll be writing perhaps unnecessary details, right? And that will obviously reduce the quality of your writing. And secondly, you'll be losing time, right? So time management is obviously important. And if you spend too much time on one question, then you'll be rushing for the next one. And that's not something you want to be in, a situation you want to be in. 10 marks are for your content. There's more weightage over here for the quality of your writing. Okay. Now, what do we have? Any questions about this? Right, we'll come back to this. with some more details. So what you have is two texts over here, as you can see. Right now, the syllabus says that it could be one text or two different texts. Okay. So far, what we've had are two texts. So this is a specimen. The papers from the May-June 2024 session, there were two texts, and I guess this week, right, the results for the October 2024 session are due on Thursday. So, right, probably then when they release it, we'll see whether there were two texts. They probably were. And so far we'll be getting two texts, but there's a possibility that there just might be one, and that one text, right, will, the approach will be the same. So what you have over here is a topic about traveling abroad, right, during vacation, visiting other countries. And one of the texts will be in favor, the other will be against, right? Now, right, in this case, text A is against and text B is in favor. And they'll give their opinions and points and reasoning and whatever. If it's a single text, it will be the same, right? And so instead of having two separate columns over here where you will be able to easily identify which one is which, in a single text, you will need to be a bit more careful in picking out the points, which ones are in favor of whatever topic is given and which one is against. Now, once you've read all of that, and it's not long, as you can see, right? It's pretty short, each one of those. You come to the question. And the question is a magazine article. Now, as I mentioned, right, there are a number of things that, number of different tasks that can be given to you. So you obviously have the magazine article, you've got letters and emails, which can be both formal and informal, right? So again, that is something you have to figure out. Then you've got reports and speech, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, right? So you've got 5 different tasks, and each of these have their own requirements, own approach, the kind of language you want to use, the kind of vocabulary you want to use, and that's something that we want to look into, and we will. Right. So in this particular case, what they've asked you is for a magazine article for young people, right? So that is also something that will tell you about the kind of language you want to use. Okay. About advantages and disadvantages about traveling. You're supposed to use, right, read both texts and use, the content from there. Now, what they mean, right, by evaluate, right, we'll look into that. You're also supposed to give your own views, so it's not everything just based on the text. You're supposed to add something of your own as well. And again, right, be careful to use your own words. Be careful to use your own words. You don't just copy paste the text from the given material. Address both bullet points. So these are the bullet points they're talking about, right? So you're supposed to talk about what's given in the text. You're supposed to give your own views as well. Begin your article with suitable headline. Now, when they're giving you this thing, right, this is instruction. So because it's a magazine article, you need to give a suitable headline. Because it's for young people, it doesn't have to be so formal. So you can write maybe, but I mean, we're not attempting it right now. So some heading, right? You could center it, you could put it right on the side, but do give a headline because they're asking you to, right? This will be checked and this will be marked. I talked about the word limit. I talked about, right, so 10 marks for content. So content similar to, right, the concept is same as we talked about in summary writing. And right? So the number of points you pick out from the text and the number of points you give for your own views, right? And how to approach this, I'll come back to this again on Thursday because the meeting's just about to end. We've got little time, right? And so how does that content add up? But in any case, you want 10 points, right? 10 points, and then, right, everything else goes to the quality of writing. Any questions? Okay, so we have a minute and a half, but I'll be ending it because we don't have enough time to continue the explanation. It will be left incomplete, and I don't want that. So we'll meet again on Thursday, inshallah, and then I'll take this forward. I'll discuss some more points about directed writing, and then the criteria of how you'll be marked. So we'll take a look at the marking scheme, and then we'll progress from there. All right, and I'll be uploading the video. You can, maybe today, maybe tomorrow. So I'll update you about that, and then you can access it using the link I've already shared. All right, so I'll see you guys on Thursday, inshallah, and keep practicing, and all the best. Allah Hafiz.
Allah Hafiz.